I'd call him a clown, but clowns wear whiteface. So what's the reason for this? Well, Trudeau was born with a silver spoon in his mouth and up his ass. The virtue-signaling skunk hates the working class, but also the legacy media is scared. The leggy media. The convoy is basically a bunch of Joe Rogans. They aren't buying what the media is selling, so the media needs to create false narratives in which they are the good guys. And the average citizen who no longer listens to them, well, they're the bad guys. They're like a delinquent babysitter who blames the kids for the grease fire in the kitchen or the cigarette burns on the sofa. Remember, CNN once cast Chris Cuomo as the good guy. Now they cast him as the bad guy. The demonizing depends on how it protects their butts. So they demonize the so far so peaceful truckers. It's easy to do. They appear whiter than the NHL All-Star game, so I guess that immediately makes them Nazis. However, much of these critics defended the riots and arson that spread across the country back in 2020. They called the violence peaceful. Now they call the peaceful violent.
It's amazing. He says things like individuals are trying to blockade our economy. Individuals are trying to shut down our economy. They're trying to shut down our way of life. Dude, that's you. Buy a mirror. Justin Trudeau explaining that he's shutting down freedom to protect your freedom. There's a lot of burning the village in order to save the village rhetoric that's come out of the COVID restrictionists. To stop. Well, I mean, the same thing could be said of the mandates that you have placed on your country over the course of the last couple of years. I'm sorry, he's so irritating. And by the way, I'm not the only one who finds him irritating. The Canadian public finds him extraordinarily irritating. In fact, Trudeau's own party is starting to turn on him over COVID restrictions. According to Politico, a backbench lawmaker from Justin Trudeau's own caucus is accusing the Prime Minister of dividing and stigmatizing Canadians by politicizing vaccine mandates and COVID-19 restrictions. As the Omicron virus shows itself to be less lethal and positive test rates fall, the truckers are sending a message to Democratic governments it's time for the pandemic emergency orders to end. The cause of this protest happens to be righteous. For 2 years, says the Wall Street Journal, the truckers were classified as essential workers and therefore exempt from vaccine mandates. About 85% of them are vaccinated. But Justin Trudeau, who heads a minority government, has chosen this moment to order that truckers be vaccinated if they want to cross back into the country from the United States. The Canadian left is calling all of these people Trumpians. Trudeau smeared them as, quote, a few people shouting and waving swastikas. But of course, that's not what this is at all. And it just is part of the general left-wing attempt to paint anyone who disagrees with them as a racist or a Nazi. They have this bag of insults that they go to every time somebody disagrees with them, God forbid. And then they just throw them, like, here comes the swastika, boom, just hit them with the swastika. Just say that they're a Nazi. And what is the evidence that the thousands and thousands of people in Ottawa protesting so they can maintain their jobs, that those people are Nazis? He doesn't have any evidence. Instead, what the media have been doing in Canada and elsewhere is they've been nutpicking, is what it's called. They find a few fringe members of the protest, and then they say, these people represent the entire protest. It's a global thing. This is not just in Canada. It turns out that human beings do not like having their liberties restricted in this way in the West. They're used to it in China, because China is an authoritarian tyranny. They may be used to it in Russia. They may be used to it in actual tyrannical states, but they're really not used to it in the West, and they don't like it. Majority favors lifting restrictions, suggesting the Trudeau mandate, which went into effect on January 15th, was a political miscalculation. By energizing a significant part of the electorate, until now less present in public discourse, he set off a backlash, deepened Canadian polarization, and raised the stakes in a showdown with the truckers. The global left is beginning to feel it, because they've spent the last 2 years insisting they're on the side of the science, and they're not on the side of the science. It turns out that the best thing that they could have done would have been to shield the vulnerable, as they did in Sweden, and then to allow people to live their lives. Instead, they decided to restrict everyone. And again, the pitch is that freedom itself is bad. We have to crack down on people using the word freedom. See, if you say freedom, what they hear is Nazi. This is how perverse the wild left, the COVID restrictionist left has become. Here is Justin Trudeau explaining that he's shutting down freedom to protect your freedom. There's a lot of burning the village in order to save the village rhetoric that's come out of the COVID restrictionists.
Individuals are trying to blockade our economy, our democracy, and our fellow citizens' daily lives. It has to stop.
It has to stop. Well, I mean, the same thing could be said of the mandates that you have placed on your country over the course of the last couple of years.
Oh, sure. The truckers?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
Those people, I mean, they're selling off their trucks today. Canadians, the Canadian government is starting to auction off all their trucks. They haven't been charged with a crime. They haven't gone to have a court hearing, nothing.
You know what strikes me about all of this, and maybe this is somewhat of a silver lining in it. I kind of feel like we're about to close the loop, right? When this started, truckers were right on the leading edge of heroes.
Yeah.
They were the very definition of essentiality.
Yeah, yeah.
In the course of 2 weeks, right? They literally went from hero to villain,
Yeah.
to goat, you know. And
We've done that, though, with the nurses.
Everything.
We've done that with police. Everybody.
yes, we are constantly changing the definition of words that for a long time we thought we understood. And those definitions are evolving in real time. And if we question it, if we ask about it, well, they look at us like a cow looking at a new gate. Like, what do you, of course, infrastructure involves reparations.
Right.
Of course it does.
Of course it does.
Of course
Right.
it does. Of course that protest was peaceful. What do you mean? You know, it's in so many ways, we've been asked, I think, to simply ignore what we're looking at and pretend that a new language has come along with lots of words that we used to understand but no longer do. It's confounding.
It's very hard to say what the worst thing is that happened to Canada in the last 2 weeks, because 6 things are worse, and each of them should be fatal to the Trudeau government. But I think perhaps the worst was the decision to suspend Parliament on Friday from discussing the Emergency Act because of the action that was instituted by the police as a consequence of the Emergency Act. He's accused the Conservatives of supporting the people who wave swastikas and tried to associate the truckers with Nazis, and went after a Jewish Conservative MP. Many countries in Europe had started to lift vaccine mandates, and that had been lifted in many states in the US, that none of that was occurring in Canada at all until the truckers started this protest. And so now these 5 provinces have started to lift their mandates, and more are going to follow. And they aren't claiming that that's a consequence of the trucker protest, but the truth of the matter is that we know that this is being run by opinion poll, which is a terrible way to run a government, and that nothing had changed before the truckers started to protest. And then we should also point out that we have an 86% vaccination rate in Canada. That's 1 dose vaccination anyways, and that no one with any sense would ever think that it would be possible to push vaccine rates above approximately 90%. And so it's terrible naivety to assume that it can be pushed beyond that. Well, we want to figure out, well, why did the truckers get demonized, and what are Canadians supposed to think about that, especially because FinTrack, which tracks financial transactions and is supposed to be taking care of such things as terrorist financing, has no evidence of suspicious transactions occurring in relationship to this protest, and that's was documented by CTV, who is hardly, you could hardly accuse of being sympathetic to the truckers. So there's that. Then there's just exactly what is the emergency here, and why is it reasonable under any conditions whatsoever to consider this an emergency of such major proportions that our basic civil liberties have to be lifted. Then the ability to freeze and seize bank accounts, which generates distrust in the banks. The precedent to define retroactive crime, because now funding a perfectly legal protest through legal means has been criminalized and associated with terrorism and organized crime, and can be punished without trial by fiat, and that appears to be permanent. Then we have the extension and redefinition of crime, because mischief has now been expanded as a category to arrest people without cause, and now you can aid and abet mischief.